Hi. The last video I made, I called it lesson 7, but this is the actual lesson 7. This is going to be on programming, conditioning, and the physical cues that a person might have. Programming is set up purposefully so that the programmer can eventually walk away from the child and the child will continue to keep themselves programmed. I think of it kind of like a big snowball at the top of the hill. You give it a tap and it will keep going. And that's what they want the programming to do. They want that mechanism to be there. So all it needs is a little nudge. And then they will put programs in that will use cues in their physical environment to start that nudge. So there will be a physical or a verbal, emotional, spiritual cue that's placed within the child, and it will reset them back to the original program. So if they stray from the thoughts of the program, if they're starting to think outside the program, then there are going to be internal checks and balances to make sure that the program gets reinstated. So it could be music, and they'll use things that are very popular. So with words, the programmer will have the child imagine or watch on a screen some type of domain that they're trying to build within the child's mind. So there's going to be many aspects to their system internally, and when they're wanting to build a portion of it, they'll use visual cues to help them understand what they're trying to build. So like we've talked about before, there are going to be hesitations and blocks that prevent healing, and those are actually put in on purpose. There's extreme trauma that's done solely for the sake of teaching the child not to remember the other trauma. So one example of how a program like this gets put in, a bomb program that tells the child they're going to explode if they remember or talk about any of the damage. So they'll convince the child that they put a physical bomb inside of them, and that if they remember what happened to them, or if they talk about what happened to them, that bomb will go off inside their head. They really do believe they're going to die. So one way, there's multiple ways that this kind of program can be put in, but one way it can be put in is, let's say the child is forced to watch endless loops of war scenes where people are exploding because of bombs, or they'll watch movies that the people are exploding. They can even have access to a mortuary where they have access to those bodies, and they explode the physical body in front of the child. So there's lots of ways to put the trauma in, and there's no way for the child to look away or to leave. Like they're either stuck in the chair or held in the chair somehow, or their eyes can actually be held open with no ability to turn their head away on endless loops. And it's horrifically traumatizing to them. Just being stuck is a trauma. Not being able to close your eyes is a trauma. Not having a say of what's coming in or when it stops is a trauma. There's multiple layers of trauma here. So then they'll take the child and show them like a makeshift bomb that's actually powered by sticking probes into an object like a potato, because potatoes carry an electrical charge, and if you put the probes in and the charge is complete, the potato can actually run a little clock. And so that's what they'll do is they'll tell them it's a bomb, but it's just a makeshift clock that's been stuck to a potato. And then they tell them if they ever talk about that ritual abuse, they're going to explode like this. And then they make the potato explode. And so from there, they take the child, they torture them, they tell them they have to forget how the program got put in place. And they starve the child on purpose. And then the only thing they offer them to eat is a potato. And so the child believes that they just ate the bomb, that the bomb is inside them. They don't have the logic to say, this is just a potato. and it's going to pass through my system. They think that when they ate the potato, it put a bomb in their brain, and that it's permanently within them somewhere. So then the programmer would choose like a common object to reinforce that. So he'll tell them something like, every time they see a Mr. Potato Head toy, it's going to remind them that they have to be quiet about the abuse and they can't remember. Or every time they see Pringles potato chips, or every time they eat a potato or see a French fry. So they use really common objects to put that conditioning element in, because the programming is what happens in the torture, and then the conditioning is what happens outside of the programming. So they're conditioned to believe that whenever they consume a potato, it's reminding them there's a bomb inside of them. So the original abuse, that's the program. And then those social cues that the programmer puts in are the conditioning to keep it running internally. And different parts of the child will be given different roles to keep programs running, but they're also attached to entities that will threaten them if they don't keep those programs running. So they can tell the child something like, you have to cover up any signs of abuse. So if there's physical damage that's really severe, like let's say a broken ankle, they can tell the child, you have to walk on this normally, or we'll break the other one, or we'll torture you, or whatever the threat is. And so the child has to tap into demonic power in order to ignore the pain that's happening in the body, so that there's no visual signs of abuse. And we can know that that's horrible for a body to walk on something that's broken or wounded like that. It causes extreme damage, and there's a price to be paid for that. And in adulthood, a lot of times the person will have issues come up, like on x-rays or medical issues, and they don't know what the original source of it is. They just have all these unexplained physical traumas and injuries that they don't have any connection to. And until that person works past the blocks, they won't remember it. They won't remember the original event. That conditioning can come in many forms. The child can be given a toy that's a reminder of the abuse. So the conscious part of the child will love the toy and play with it, like a Raggedy Ann doll or something, and not know that that's actually programming, that she has to, she's a rag doll, and whenever the abuser comes close, she has to lay still and she can't resist. So there's a lot of really terrible ideas that are attached to common objects for the child, and they won't remember it. They won't know they're laying still because they were told that, because the part inside knows that, but the front part doesn't. And so they won't have an understanding of why they continue to do a certain behavior, because that other part will come forward and take over when they're supposed to. And then the part up front, who's the conscious self, will be dissociated and off somewhere else. They can be off internally in something they've imagined, or even Jesus can take them somewhere else so that they can endure it. So the toys that they're given, and they love to play with, can actually be re-traumatizing themselves without knowing it. And it can really cause a civil war inside. It can cause self-hatred to develop, because the ones who are being abused are so mad that front part loves those toys or loves the people that are abusing them. And so it can really set up some polar opposite emotions inside. And the wounded parts of the child can see the denial, the front self, as stupid, when it's not. It's just trauma, and it's set up to be that way. So children's nursery rhymes, storybooks, they're often used as conditioning. And an adult can find themselves humming or even tapping out a rhythm, or doodling on a page, or maybe drawing in sand if they're at the beach. The adult part can find themselves doing repetitive things and not know why they're doing it. And typically you can trace that back to a program that somebody inside has to keep going. So it's because it's their job, and they're terrified that if they don't do this job, they're going to be punished. This is really heavy information, I know. So I want to leave you with some encouragement to help the overcomer. You want to help them be curious about the patterns that they're recognizing in their thoughts and behaviors. Start to notice what do they gravitate towards when they're not even thinking about it? What are they gravitating towards? As far as music, movies, are there certain movies that they watch over and over? Are there favorite objects from their childhood that they still have? Are there words or phrases that they say without knowing it? Like sometimes people can say, "Oh, crikey." Well, if you look at the origin of that, it's actually a curse word. It's like saying, "Oh, Christ," "Oh, Jesus Christ," and taking the Lord's name in vain. So there's a lot of words that we say and we don't know what they mean. We just say them habitually. And so we have to start becoming aware of what we're actually doing. What are we actually saying? What are we taking part in that we don't even know? So you want to help them be curious about those patterns of behavior in their lives and recognize where their thoughts are going and what kind of emotions are coming with those thoughts. And you want to help them to work through self-hatred for not knowing and not remembering, because it can feel very overwhelming to have to constantly recover things that have been pushed aside, and it makes them feel culpable, like they were part of it, but it wasn't free will. I always tell people that I'm working with, if it was free will, you could remember it and you would be able to tell me what happened. But because it was trauma, and in trauma, you don't have a choice. You're in a car accident, that's trauma. You don't have a choice, you're in it. So whether it's, happenstance trauma or whether it's planned trauma, part of the element of that is not having choice. And so we have to keep reminding them and bringing them back around to, you did not choose this. This was chosen for you. You were a child. There were people that were responsible for you. And so you have to let them know that even though this was them and their body doing things, their voice saying things, it wasn't their choice. And they're not held accountable for that. Once they know it, what they do with it is their choice. So you want to try and be gentle with them as you're helping them recognize these patterns, because there's very real terror internally about knowing what happened to them and about what will happen if they remember. So be as patient as you need to be. Talk about the same thing as many times as they need to talk about it, because you're building capacity, you're building relationship, and you're building trust. So you're not wasting your time by taking your time. So as they're trying to remember, you can help ask them questions like, what does it feel like would happen if you remembered why your ankle hurt so much? And when they tell you the belief, you work with them to see that although it felt very true at that time, we need to just check, is that still true? Or we need to check, how did you learn that? Who told you that? What made you believe that? So you can get to the memory by probing with little questions. Remain curious yourself. Don't jump to conclusions. You don't know what they're going to say. Even if you've heard that same kind of thing before, it's different. And so you've got to let the information come from them. Because if you say, oh, I've worked with this before, I know exactly what this is, we need to just pray this, this, and this, that is not going to be the emotional exchange of healing that they need. So when they tell you the belief, you're going to work with them to see, is that still true? And then as you are working with them and they're developing their ability to hear from the Lord, you can ask them, would it be okay if we ask the Lord about this? And Sometimes they'll say yes, and sometimes they'll have hesitations. And so you got to work with the hesitations and be able to get to a place where you can try and hear from the Lord what he needs them to know. So you can say, Lord, they believe that if they remember this, they're going to explode. Will they? Will they actually explode? Is that still true? Was it ever true? And the Lord will show them an outcome, and it's different every time. He'll show them an outcome that's full of hope, that they'll be able to heal, and they won't feel anxiety every time they see a potato or see a rag doll or whatever the thing is. So the Lord can bring healing to the child self and set them free. And there might be some renouncing of beliefs or entities depending on what event was being suppressed. So there might be multiple parts of the child involved depending on how severe the trauma was. So you want to make sure that you just take your time and let the child part tell you what they need to tell you, and see if there's anything else they need to share with you. And then have them look around and see if there's anybody else that's involved. Or you can ask a question, are there other parts that have things they need to share? And so you just invite it and make space, and you just remain curious about what might be going on there. And you always want to come back around and check with the Lord. Is there anything else that he needs to reveal? Is there anything else he needs to share? So when you've worked through the memory and they're at peace with all the parts that were in the memory, and you've renounced. And sometimes you'll have to ask them, is there anything you're holding on to? Were you given anything? And they'll pull, something out of their pocket, or they'll be holding something, and they'll tell you what they believe they're holding. And sometimes you have to ask, is that really true? So you ask the Lord, is this really a beautiful necklace that they're holding? And the Lord will show them, no, it's actually snakes. It's full of witchcraft, and they'll want to let go. And so if they're having a hard time letting go of whatever they were given, sometimes it's a special power, sometimes it's a belief, whatever it is. If they're having a hard time letting go, you need to see, okay, is this actually what you think it is? Is it doing what you were told it was going to do? And if it is there anything else that's happening that you don't know that came along with that? Because the enemy is the father of lies. And so he might tell partial truth, but it's in order to cover up a lie. And so you always ask the Lord, is there anything else that he needs to let them know? And so he might show them, you were given these treasures, but they didn't tell you it came with this kind of bondage. So in the enemy's kingdom, everything has to be earned. And once you earn it, you have to continue earning it. There's never any rest or any status quo. There's a lot of tension and conflict and jealousy, and there's a lot of expectation that you will continue to do the thing that got you whatever power you were given. So you check back in with the Lord and ask what else they need to know. Now, once that's done and everything's removed from the child, and there's peace inside, and there's no one else that needs to be dealt with, then you come back around and you ask the adult self. You say to the person in front of you, you say, is it okay if we talk to Jesus about what would this mean if it was true? If what your parts just said actually happened, what would that mean to you? And so they might say something like, well, if that's true, this world is dangerous. Or if that's true, I'm unsafe. Or nothing feels real or true. They might say, if that's true, I'm stupid for not recognizing all the clues that I've had all along the way, that something terrible has happened to me. Or they might say something like, if that's true, I can't trust God to protect me. So depending on what they say, what it means to them, if that's true, then you talk through that and you synchronize with them and tell them, yeah, that was really hard. Remember, there are reasons you couldn't remember. It wasn't a choice for you not to remember. So then you synchronize with them, but you your truth, your words of healing are never going to have the same impact as the words of healing that come from Jesus. And so you want to bring it back around to him. And depending on what they say, you'll take that belief to Jesus. So it's important for him to speak to the adult self and bring truth to their beliefs about what it means if that memory is true. Both of those areas are really important to deal with. You have to deal with what happened as a child and what the child believed. You have to deal with what does it mean to the person who is the conscious self, if this is true. So Jesus will bring a truth to that person that's very individual. Our logic is never going to be as impactful as his truth. His truth is just unexpectedly beautiful. He could take them to a heavenly place and show them that this is where he walked with them while the abuse was happening. He could tell them how he strengthened their spirit so that when it came back to the body was going to be healed. He could tell them that he died on the cross in order for him to come and take most of the pain that they were given. And so sometimes you could ask Jesus, how much of that did you bear for them? And he'll say like 95%, as much as legally he was allowed to by God's law. So allow him to meet them in that pain and show them what he was doing so that they know they weren't alone in it. There's a verse I love. It's Isaiah 63 verse 9. And it says, in all of their afflictions, he was afflicted, and the angel of his presence saved them. In his love and in his pity or mercy, he redeemed them and lifted them up and carried them all the days of old. And I can't tell you how many people have remembered Jesus coming to the memory and picking them up and taking them away. You know, he works outside of time. And so even though that was in the child's past, it brings healing to the moment. He shows them he was there. And when he comes into that situation, it no longer carries that emotional bondage. It no longer carries that isolation and abandonment, the betrayal, all of that. Once Jesus has met them, it's as if he was there the entire time. And it brings a healing that logic can't explain. And this will become their reality, and it will strengthen them, and it will strengthen you. It'll grow your faith to see how beautifully and creatively Jesus has met them time after time. So the stronghold that takes the enemy years to establish in programming can be torn down in just moments through an encounter with Jesus. He really is all sufficient in this. His grace is sufficient. His mercies are new. He will be able to redeem this. There's nothing that he can't redeem. It's our job to continually be willing to let him redeem. The Bible says, let this mind be in you. So we have to purposely let the mind of Christ be in us. And this is part of that process. For us, when we're helping them, for them to bring the memories, we have to have the mind of Christ. It's the only way out of the mind control.